Welcome all to CivilNet. My name is Emilio Cricchio. The time is 6 p.m. Yerevan time, September 21st, 2021, and Armenia is marking 30 years of independence. On this day, 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union was being dissolved, the Supreme Council of Armenia, the name of the Armenian parliament at the time, declared the country an independent state. As Armenia marks this momentous occasion, CivilNet too is marking 10 years of being on the airwaves. We will bring you CivilNet's latest interviews, reports, and discussions as we roll with live coverage. Before we get into it, let's go over some of the stories making headlines in Armenia today. Today, a concert event will take place in Yerevan's Republic Square. A light show, music, and other performances will be held. Every year, similar events take place, usually accompanied by a military parade. This year, many were discontented, claiming that holding such festivities is inappropriate as the country faces a border crisis, as many Armenians remain captive in Azerbaijan, and as not even a year has passed since Armenia suffered a defeat in the Second Karabakh War, leaving more than 4,000 dead. Different world leaders have congratulated Armenia on Independence Day. US President Joe Biden sent a message to Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan commending the Armenian people and noted the tragic loss of life in the Karabakh conflict. Biden said that we mourn with the Armenian people. America will promote conflict resolution and continue to advocate for the release of all Armenian captives being held in Azerbaijan. French President Emmanuel Macron, in his message, stated that France will spare no effort to find a peaceful solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And Russian President Vladimir Putin, too, sent a congratulatory message and called for deeper relations between Armenia and Russia. Now let's look at the history. In 1991, an independence referendum was held in Soviet Armenia on September 21st. 99.5% of the electorate said yes to independence. Independence Day, therefore, falls on September 21st, but Republic Day is celebrated on May 28th. May 28th is marked as the day of the foundation of the First Republic of Armenia. Armenia's declaration of independence was proclaimed on August 23rd, 1990, before the de jure independence of Armenia. The adoption of the declaration was the beginning of the process of independence from the Soviet Union. But what preceded the declaration of independence? The Karabakh movement, which began in the late 1980s, and the subsequent ethnic and other conflicts, together with economic issues, shook the foundations of the USSR. In August 1991, a coup attempt in Moscow attempted to thwart the collapse of the Union. This failed, and the collapse became inevitable. The original copy of the Declaration of Independence is kept in the History Museum of Armenia. The declaration itself was read by one Aram Manukyan, who has the same namesake of another Aram Manukyan, one of the founding fathers of the First Republic. By March 2nd, 1992, the Armenian flag was raised in front of the United Nations in New York City, and in December of the same year, a UN office opened in Yerevan. Lithuania was the first country to recognize Armenia's independence on August 4th, 1991, followed by Romania and Russia. We will now go to an interview with Salpi Ghazaryan, founding director of CivilNet. She was there 10 years ago leading the charge to get CivilNet up and running. She joined CivilNet's Ani Paitian from Los Angeles to discuss CivilNet's journey over the past 10 years. They discussed what Salpi's vision was for CivilNet, how journalism and media has changed over the past 10 years, and what responsibilities media workers have.
Welcome to CivilNet. Armenia celebrates 30 years of independence. On the same day, CivilNet turns 10 years. What was the mission of CivilNet throughout these years? How did the media and information field develop throughout this decade? What were the most striking events? And how should media and CivilNet tackle the issues of today and tomorrow? Sapir Azarian, the co-founder of the Sivilitas Foundation and founding director of CivilNet, is my guest today. Sapijan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ani.
So, when you founded CivilNet, what did you have in your mind? What kind of media were you dreaming of that was missing in Armenia?
You know, I worked in the foreign ministry with Foreign Minister Vartan Oskanyan for nearly 10 years. And in the foreign ministry, it became very clear that when you speak to representatives of other countries, you talk about foreign policy for only so long, and very quickly the question turns to domestic policy. What is the country doing for education, for health? How is civil society participating? Is democracy healthy? And so when he left the foreign ministry, he decided that an NGO, which we established together, called the Sivilitas Foundation, would have the opportunity to do domestic work in order to support civil society, to change thinking, and to really empower citizens. To do that, it quickly became clear that you had to do one of two things: either enter the field of education or media. So we chose media, which I think was possibly a harder choice, because media works, either to make money. It's a commercial outfit, and clearly CivilNet isn't. CivilNet is the other kind. It's the kind that needs to spend money in order to be a mirror to society and a window to that society. That's what we were thinking, that the media is the tool by which to really shine a light on what is actually going on in people's homes, in people's heads, in people's hearts, and in the government that's supposed to work for them. And look, I'm going to say government a lot, and I mean government in the American sense. That is everybody in a leadership position. I'm not just talking about the executive branch. So that's what we wanted to do. And I think in many ways, CivilNet succeeded in bringing a new culture to the media environment.
So if we talk about the country in itself, how do or can the media shape a country? And do you think that through years, CivilNet was able to achieve this mission?
Has CivilNet changed the country? Well, not yet. We're working on it. You're working on it. I think that there have been a great many changes that CivilNet has made, and you're all going to be talking about that during the 10th anniversary programming. Look, the fundamental thing about journalism, and this is an old saying, is that the best journalism builds communities. How does it do that? It does it by doing a few really basic things. One is you hold a huge flashlight onto all the good things that are happening. And we don't do that enough in Armenia. We've never done it enough. And when I say we, I mean all of us, all of the media, all of the NGOs and government. There are a lot of good things happening even today. We need to shine a light on those because it's inspiring and it becomes contagious. We need to report on all of the cheats, the scoundrels, the politicians, the businessmen, all of the things that are done incorrectly, unjustly for people and for society and for the country. We need to really urge ourselves as journalists to do better. And we need to give a platform to the dissenting voices, the voices that disagree, so that there really is a discussion and an argument about the things that matter. We curse the things we don't like, but we don't really have an honest, open discussion about the fundamental things that matter. And if that's not important today, I don't know what is, because all of that is what's going to help us build something better. And I know these are all cliches, and I know people have said all of this, and I know I'm not saying anything new, but that's how the media functions in the world. And when it works because it does these things.
So if we talk about media, you've witnessed the development of media through these 10 years in Armenia. What's your take on that?
That in some ways we have become the worst of what media and social media around the world has done over these 10 years. You know, a lot of commercial media, the purpose is to make money. The more clicks, the better. We're no different. The commercial interests are still there. The political interests are still there. Armenia is so divided, and the media together with it, so that everything is either black or white. You know, when we started CivilNet and we were trying to think of a name, for a long time we said we should just call this gray. We should just call this the gray zone, because the purpose was to try to show all of the complexities in life, in health, in education, in government, in security, in neighborhood, in relations with Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran. Nothing is black and white. Life isn't black and white. But our media has continued in many ways to be black and white. And the one thing that none of us do enough, none of us, CivilNet included, is we're not the agenda setters. We react to what either businessmen or government or international community or an interesting individual does. But to set the agenda, to change the conversation, that's on media, that's on all of us, because it's those little small stories, you know, one line in the budget, the agenda of the next government seating, the next meeting, the small details that make up the process that power uses to make change. We need to know what that is. And the media can, I sound like the preaching I've always done, right? But I still believe this, that media absolutely can set the agenda and ask the questions that are not being publicly discussed. We learned the mistakes of that. For a year, we've been beating ourselves over the head for why is it that media did not talk about the difficult things? Well, some of us did, but it's something that has got to continue. That's the one thing we haven't done. Climate change, where are we in setting the agenda for climate change in the Caucasus? This is a neighborhood that doesn't talk to each other. Climate change is going to force us to, or it's going to send us back 500 years. Are we talking about that? And so many other things.
Armenia went through a lot of happy and sad moments. The last one is a tragic one. It's the war in Artsakh in fall 2020. As a media, what do we want for the country? To what extent can the media contribute to assuring stability and security? And how do we as media assure a competent and appropriate government? And what is our responsibility as media to find those strong leaders of the country?
For many reasons, the line between society and government continues to be a solid line. You know, this is us living our lives, and that's them running the country. We need, as media, to be able to show people government from the inside, to show how the sausage is made, is what, you know, is said, to show how the really difficult questions are or aren't being discussed. Especially after everything that's happened this year, the media has a really important task in helping us, helping Armenians, helping Armenia rebuild our humanity. I think that took a solid hit. The personal insecurities that so many Armenians are living, not to mention the insecurity that the people, the nation, the country, Armenia, Artsakh are living. We have a responsibility to rebuild our humanity by showing the stories and talking to the people who day to day are living their lives and not cursing about it and not cursing each other about it. We also have to really work on fortifying our democracy. It's bruised. It's absolutely bruised, and it's only going to get worse if the fundamental questions are not discussed. If we don't get past labeling each other, less able to help us protect our lives and our interests as citizens. Democracy is bruised, and media has a huge job in holding the people in power to account, now more than ever, but also holding citizens to account. Citizens have to say what it is they want, not peace and security. Yeah, we want peace and security. The world wants that. But specifically, what do we want? Do we want to overhaul our education system? Do we once and for all want an education system that answers the fundamental questions about who we want to be as a nation? Do we want to overhaul our transportation system? Do we want to overhaul our energy system? Not tomorrow morning, but what are the questions that are going to make my life better? And citizens have a responsibility to ask the questions, and the media has a responsibility to really, really promote the questions and look for people who will have answers to specific questions. They're the ones who are going to be the leaders tomorrow, not the guys who stand and talk to me about, you know, betrayal and peace and security and land and territory. Those guys talk. We need the ones who are willing to talk about specific ways to make your and my life better. Media is a platform that needs to be offered as a challenge. You have something to say, come say it.
Thank you very much, Salpijan, for this talk.
Well, I missed giving it. And I think that CivilNet has done amazing work over these 10 years, as different as each year has been. And this next year is going to be different, difficult, but with opportunity if we turn it into that. It's either going to be a year where we look forward or a year where we continue to look backward. Media, and CivilNet especially, has a huge role to play. And thank you, Ani, and thank everybody for doing what you do.
Thank you very much for establishing, creating, and founding CivilNet.
Thank you for making it work.
Well, thank you for following us, and continue to follow us and watch us. We do everything we do for you.
And now, as we move on with our rolling coverage, in our second segment, CivilNet host and analyst Eric Hakopian speaks in poems and prose as Eric gives his thoughts on Armenia's 30th anniversary of independence in his Insights with Eric Hakopian show.
Welcome to this week's Insights with Eric Hakopian. This week's show is going to be dedicated to the 30th anniversary of Armenia's independence. It's going to be short and poetic. When looking back at the last 30 years of Armenian history and what 30 years they have been, there's actually one word in the English language that encapsulates it, and that's the word more. We have produced more headlines than any country of our size has any business producing. We have produced more heroes, more villains, more unexpected victories, more tragic losses, more saints, more sinners, more individual brilliance than most, and most collective ignorance than most. And most importantly, more free than most. This is something that's going to be very little noted today, but it will be something that will be greatly appreciated by future generations. I think the greatest accomplishment that we have produced in the last 30 years is actually coming up with a new conception of freedom and a new definition of it for this part of the world. A freedom in which the great Chilean poet Pablo Neruda described as the perfect balance for any individual and a society. And what is that? It's a freedom that is an equal partnership between solitude and solidarity, between emotion and action, and a knowledge of oneself balanced with a knowledge of the world. Who knows what the next 30 years will bring? The one thing that we've learned is that God has a real sense of humor. I will close today's show with a prophecy from one of my favorite French poets, Rimbaud, in which he wrote, "In the dawn, armed with a burning patience, we shall enter the splendid cities." Happy birthday, Armenia.
I am now joined in the studio by Eric Hakopian himself in the flesh. So, Eric, thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
It's been 30 years of Armenian independence, and we are marking independence after thousands died in last year's devastating 44-day war. How do you think Armenians are perceiving this 30th anniversary of independence on this backdrop of grief and loss, and how do you think they should perceive it?
Well, I think it's very subjective, I think, because everybody, because of their personal experiences, have very specific ways in which they're viewing today. Few, I would say, are joyful. Some are appreciative. Many are sad. But I think we have to, obviously, when you're looking at a 30-year period, you're looking at a process. And there's obviously plenty of dark moments in those 30 years, but there have been also plenty of glorious moments in those 30 years. And here we are standing, operating as an independent nation. In many ways, this country, is a miracle. If you go back to our history in 1900 or 1915, someone would have described the Armenia of today. Our great-grandfathers would have, or grandmothers would have thought of it as a miracle. So I think it's quite appropriate to celebrate that miracle while fully understanding our failings and all the work that still needs yet to be done.
And a concert event will take place today in Yerevan's Republic Square, but some are discontented, saying it's inappropriate to hold such an event in these trying times. What say you? Should it go ahead, or is it in fact inappropriate?
Well, first of all, we're not North Korea. We don't have official mournings for 3 years or 7 years or whatever, ridiculous things like that. I think when I hear that, and I've heard that from different people, there's this great anarchist concept about you don't mourn, you organize. And another one is the propaganda of the deed. In this case, it's the patriotism of the deed. Mourning is not what's relevant. I would ask those people who are criticizing anybody celebrating today is, what have you done in the last year to house a refugee? Have you been volunteering in a school if you have special talents to teach something? Have you created a job? Have you found a veteran a job? Have you helped a disabled veteran? I think we need to reimagine our idea of patriotism into something that is about deeds, that is about sacrifice and about us costing something and not arguing over silly things about celebrations. So this is a time of reflection and rethinking our concepts of patriotism and not sitting behind, Facebook posts attacking people on silly things.
And what about the development of the Armenian state and society over the past 30 years? Since independence, there's been 4 main political eras led by 4 men, Ter-Petrosyan, Kocharian, Sargsyan, and Pashinyan. In what ways has the state of Armenian politics improved, and in what ways has it gotten worse? And how do you see the state of Armenian politics and society today?
Well, you judge every society in multiple facets. Its economy, its politics, democratic development, society. And military and defense. I think when you look at Armenian society, it has vastly transformed itself over the last 30 years. In some ways for the better, especially when it comes becoming more open-minded, or women having a much greater role, for example, in our economy. And this is obviously very regional. It's different from place to place, even though there's obviously places where we've stepped back from, Soviet Armenia was a great center of culture. We're certainly not that now, or the level of culture. So it's a mixed bag on that front. I think obviously on defense, we started with an A and we ended in a D in this 30-year period. But part of that was a delusion of how secure we really were. And we've been dealing with the fallout of those delusions. I think when it comes to democratic development, I think we've made tremendous progress. And we are, at the end of the day, an island of freedom in a sea of tyranny. Mm-hmm. And I keep saying that, and I've said that countless times, I would challenge anyone. You drive from here through Central Asia, you would need to get to South Korea to get to a country that has the freedoms that we have here. Mm-hmm. So on that front, we've done well. And in the economy, having come through very, very terrible times, over the past 30 years, we've actually managed to create a real economy, not based on natural resources that are going to go away, what a multifaceted economy, tourism, agriculture, tech, light manufacturing, nowhere where it needs to be. But if you look at the direction of what we're likely headed towards, I think we're going to make good progress there. So it's a mixed bag. We should not be satisfied about where we're at, but at the same time, our pessimism, which is so natural to our instincts as a people, should be tempered with reality.
And what about the revolution that happened 3 years ago? People were so full of hope in 2018. Many feel those hopes have been dashed. Is the legacy of the revolution in tatters, or does the revolution always advance?
Well, both. I mean, historically, and this is something that frankly we should have seen coming. Historically, almost every revolution is followed by a war. Revolutionary states get attacked. That was true about France. It was true about Russia. It was true about Iran. Revolutionary states get attacked by foreign powers because they think their country is vulnerable at that time, just as an aggregate, as a general principle. So we should not have been surprised that we would have been attacked. And Armenia was, there's an element of the war last year which involved us being a very bad example. People, if you're an island of freedom in a sea of tyranny, you're not popular among the other tyrants. So I think there's an element of that. So there's not a revolution in the world that doesn't revolution. The day after the revolution, there's 90% popularity, and every day after that, the revolution gets less popular in every country. I think if you look at the last 3 years, what we have done is we have dismantled a lot of bad things, but we have not shown the state capacity to build good things up to now. There's exceptions to that, obviously, but if you're going to judge the revolution, it's a positive work in progress that has, obviously terrible moments during the war, and but at the same time, you need to understand the balance of where we're at and the fact that we almost went through technically sort of a bloodless civil war last year. We survived. We had elections, democratic, and we're still the freest country in this region.
And Eric, I know you don't look a day over 30, but do you remember being Armenian 30 years ago and the news breaking that Armenian is to be an independent state?
Well, I'm not gonna. I think it was 23, 24 at that time, so I'm not gonna make myself bigger than I was as far as the kinds of things I was thinking about. But I had just finished a couple of years before that a class in Professor Rovanesyan's class at UCLA, so I was somewhat immersed in Armenian history. And the one thing that stood out for me is to be part of a generation of Armenians that saw independence after 600 years. That is 30, 40 generations. And in some ways it's a miracle and it's a blessing. And I appreciated that historical moment, but I can't pretend to have had a greater understanding than that at that point.
And finally, CivilNet is marking 10 years of being on the airwaves. What do you think about what CivilNet is trying to accomplish?
I think if you look at we've discussed this before, is we have islands of excellence in this country, and we need to set up, if we have 5 or 10, we need to have 50 and 100. CivilNet was originally one of the islands of excellence and still is. Obviously, we're not perfect. But as far as raising the standard of journalism and what's expected, raising the level of dialogue, raising the standards of what's acceptable, and having real solid journalism, I think CivilNet truly is one of the islands of excellence that we have in this country.
Well, Eric, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And CivilNet has had many interns over the years, too many to count. Our latest intern was Teresa Di Mauro, an Italian, a fellow Sicilian. She had worked in Georgia and is now on to Prague for future ambitions. During her time here at CivilNet, she traveled to Gyumri with CivilNet's Hagop Manukyan to find out more about 3 Italians who have made the city their home. Antonio Montalto is one of the 3. He came to Armenia in 1988 to help with the Gyumri earthquake relief effort. Now all 3 are business owners in the old city and are making efforts to restore the antiquity of Gyumri.
Congelatia.
Gli abbiamo insegnato a dire buongiorno. Quindi tuo figlio, che fa tuo figlio? Io sono sicuro che fa pattinaggio sul ghiaccio. Perché tutti a Mosca
Siamo
fanno
tifosi di Juventus. Oh! No, no.
Posto, sti cazzi, tanto non capisce niente nessuno.
Magari ci dici qua il nome e il perché di congelatio?
Ma congelatio è un mix fra russo e armeno, cioè una parola che non esiste. L'abbiamo inventata quando io ho cominciato a fare il cuoco qua a Yerevan, perché avevo 2 collaboratrici che non parlavano chiaramente l'inglese e l'italiano e parlavano solo russo e l'armeno. In Italia abbiamo come si può dire, un gioco che se aggiungiamo azia alle parole italiane, tantissime diventano russo. Per esempio, democrazia diventa democrazia, intuizione diventa intuizia. Io dovevo congelare dei ravioli e ho detto a queste donne, congelazia, perché congelare più azia, però chiaramente non è russo, non esiste, e loro non capivano. Poi ho fatto vedere che bisogna metterla nel freezer, e allora per 2 anni abbiamo usato questa parola tutti i giorni, è diventata la nostra nuova lingua.
Abbiamo un bed and breakfast dove facciamo delle colazioni italiane e armene, tutte fatte in casa, ed è molto, molto ospitale perché abbiamo restaurato questo edificio appunto in stile un po' italiano. Mi sono trasferito in Armenia nel 2017 a febbraio, perciò sono 4 anni e mezzo che sono in Armenia circa. Avevo una rosa di scelte nei miei viaggi che ho fatto nella mia vita. Una era la Repubblica Ceca, perché sono innamorato della Repubblica Ceca, e una era il Nepal. Il Nepal era troppo lontano, la Repubblica Ceca era troppo vicina, perché la mia idea era quella proprio di cambiare aria rispetto all'Europa, e l'Armenia rappresenta quella dimensione di cerniera, un po' come anche il Trentino, la provincia da dove vengo, una cerniera fra mondo tedesco e mondo latino, e l'Armenia è di fatto una cerniera fra Asia e Europa, e perciò ho deciso che l'Armenia doveva diventare la mia nuova casa.
Sono un perito elettronico, non ho niente a che vedere con questo mondo, ma la mia regione, soprattutto la mia città, paesino, diciamo, in quel momento era pieno di confezioni, cioè, quindi girava tutto il mondo intorno ai pantaloni, quindi anche a me mi ha coinvolto in questa cosa. Alla fine dei conti loro cercavano qualcuno che sapesse fare il denim, perché qua non esiste, non sono capaci di fare il denim. Questo mio amico, comune amico, con il titolare, mi ha detto: vieni un po' qua, andiamo a vedere. No, non ne voglio sapere niente dell'estero, perché erano già 3 anni che ero in Italia, e mi ha convinto e sono venuto. Novembre del 2018, sono venuto qua il 20, il 22 e ancora sono qua.
Diciamo il mio arrivo qui in Armenia, che è stato assolutamente casuale, nel senso che come medico mi hanno proposto subito dopo il terremoto di partecipare a un progetto di assistenza nel settore sociosanitario a Spitak. Abbiamo costruito un piccolo ospedale pediatrico e un asilo nido. L'aspetto doloroso del terremoto ha creato relazioni, fra cui quella con l'Italia, che è stato, come dire, una scoperta, ma una scoperta talmente forte che è esplosa proprio in un entusiasmo di relazione, di fiducia, di speranza, per cui questo tipo di rapporto è stato visto, secondo me, in maniera speciale all'interno della storia armena.
Noi abbiamo acquistato questa casa che era messa abbastanza male, nel senso che aveva solamente le pietre e aveva bisogno di un grande restauro. È stata costruita molto probabilmente dal generale Preskuryakov, che era un generale russo che si è spostato qui a Gyumri durante la guerra fra impero ottomano e impero zarista, e per esempio il soffitto è originale, l'abbiamo tutto restaurato in legno originale. Allora ho deciso di partire restaurando il più possibile, cioè mantenendo l'idea dell'edificio, che è in stile neoclassico del 1880.
Ecco, questa è una facciata di un edificio che è storico, È singolare, io la vivo come una specie di, come dire, come una gioia particolare, essendo io italiano, perché l'architetto italiano, c'erano dei fratelli Gegamov che vivevano a Giombria, avevano sentito, essendo persone ricche, che c'era un architetto italiano a Tbilisi, sono andato per discutere il progetto e hanno fatto il progetto, quindi con un architetto italiano. Non vuol dire niente, poteva essere anche cecoslovacco, il fatto che hanno aggiunto una cosa bella a Giombria, io ne sono contento. Poi diciamo con un minimo di campanilismo il fatto che una cosa bella fatto un italiano al servizio dell'Armenia e del mondo mi fa particolarmente piacere.
Poi appunto l'hai saputo dopo?
L'ho saputo dopo averlo comprato, decenni dopo averlo comprato, ho scoperto questa storia che ovviamente mi ha fatto piacere e anche responsabilità di conservarlo.
Questa è la nostra, praticamente la mia Italia, perché ho cercato di ricostruire un laboratorio di confezione di 5 tasche, esattamente come se fosse in Italia. L'attrezzatura è ultramoderna perché sono tutte ultime macchine di ultima generazione, dal taglio automatico alle macchine automatiche espressamente fatte per fare il denim. 5 tasche, quindi sono 3 anni che sono qua, le persone sono, diciamo, all'inizio ho avuto difficoltà, perché sai, arriva una persona nuova, un italiano, chi è questo, cosa vuole da noi? No, io sono venuto solo per insegnare, quindi all'inizio è stata un po' dura, perché loro mi vedevano un pochettino come lo straniero di turno, di cosa vuole questo, poi dopo piano piano ci siamo conosciuti meglio e vedo che adesso c'è un bel feeling tra noi.
E cerchiamo di dare un servizio anche un po' diverso, con un occhio anche un po' più europeo, perché spesso e volentieri gli europei vengono in Armenia anche per percepire quell'aspetto esotico che viene dall'Unione Sovietica e che tante volte qui in Armenia viene percepito come una cosa vecchia da distruggere.
Tanti armeni non considerano i mobili o gli oggetti del design sovietico che hanno 30-40 anni, non dico antichi, esatto, le cose vintage se vogliamo, le considerano quasi trash perché sono cresciuti in ogni casa con queste cose. Però se tu ne prendi alcune e le metti in un contesto moderno risulta una cosa gradevole. O tante volte gli armeni vengono e dicono: ma hai visto questa sedia? Ce l'aveva la nostra nonna in casa, è uguale, ma guarda che bella qua. Sì, perché devi metterla in un contesto diverso. E anche questo fa parte un po' dell'italianità, cioè per tirare fuori la bellezza dalle cose che ci sono, che esistono già, e poterle inserire in un contesto diverso. Questo è un isolatore di una centrale idroelettrica che serve per, dentro questi spazi andavano i cavi elettrici. L'ho trovato, è del 1981. Questo è uno degli elementi che abbiamo nostro bed and breakfast vintage, chiaramente, è una testa di Lenin in basalto che sarà circa 250 kg, forse più, e è la testa di una statua molto grande, io credo intorno ai 4-5 metri, che abbiamo trovato quasi, direi, nella spazzatura, e ne abbiamo in qualche maniera salvato. E questa statua era posta in una delle piazze principali di Gyumri, quando Gyumri in epoca sovietica si chiamava Leninakan, cioè la città di Lenin, perciò ha anche un'importanza storica notevole.
Qui è tutto armeno, insomma, quindi non ci sono cose portate da altre nazioni e mi fa piacere notarlo perché quando la gente mi dice che bello, io dico caspita, è una cosa nostra, non è una cosa degli altri. E quindi noi abbiamo cominciato con la ceramica. La ceramica c'ha una tradizione armena perché parte dalla Turchia, Kutaia, poi si sposta a Gerusalemme, però come al solito ci sono spazi, diciamo, c'è stata una vacazio che è stata l'Unione Sovietica in cui abbiamo perso tutti i riferimenti, adesso si tratta di recuperare quei riferimenti e tramutarli in capacità formative e lavoro. Quindi tutta la nostra azione deve essere quella di portare delle persone che sanno e che possano dare una mano.
E poi da qui praticamente operazione per operazione cresce il pantalone, perché dalla tasca, come hai visto là, incominciamo ad attaccarci un altro pezzo vedi? Questo è come costruire un puzzle, la stessa identica cosa, quindi devi costruire pezzo per pezzo, ok? Praticamente questo è un assemblaggio di un davanti che abbiamo visto là e un dietro. Questo è un dietro, guarda, ok? Assemblato. Non è completamente finito, però già ha la sua forma. Questo è un po' il mio ufficio, che io non ci sono mai. Lavoro con due ragazze che fanno la costruzione dei capi e poi eccoli, qua ti ritrovi un po' tutto, da un jeans strappato a un jeans colorato a un jeans marmorizzato. Allora, la materia prima no, non si trova qua perché il tessuto viene principalmente dalla Turchia, dal Pakistan, Uzbekistan, dall'Italia, anzi diciamo che i migliori tessuti vengono dall'Italia che stiamo utilizzando. Però non sono nemmeno male quelli che adoperiamo che vengono dall'Uzbekistan per esempio, okay? Che loro sono abbastanza vicini, quindi è molto facile anche recuperare la materia prima. Però per quanto riguarda i filati che compongono il pantalone, per quanto riguarda gli accessori, qua in Armenia non c'è niente, quindi dobbiamo per forza andare all'estero e l'estero per noi è l'Italia, perché l'Italia è l'Italia. C'è niente da dire, in Italia troviamo tutto.
Così disfattismo sovietico. Cioè, l'idea di contribuire alla bellezza dell'Armenia è una cosa che ci sta molto a cuore. Ci sono, in questo è sconfinato, specialmente Gyumri, che è una cittadina, diciamo, che ha sempre avuto fama di essere culturalmente molto avanzata, ma c'è un centro storico che potenzialmente può dare molto, può creare molti posti di lavoro, proprio nel settore turistico, ma non è automatico. Ci vuole una collaborazione molto forte fra il pubblico e il privato. L'idea è di conquistare metro per metro diciamo, il centro storico che sia funzionale a quello che è il fatto che le famiglie ci vivono, che i bambini possano giocare a football, i bambini possono anche rovinare un'aiuola, ma è il loro mestiere, cioè i bambini non possiamo tenerli chiusi in casa, però è bello vedere che una strada prima non era e adesso ci sono biciclette o ragazzi che giocano.
La voglia di far rinascere il centro storico, che è una cosa che mi preme molto, insomma la nostra formazione italiana è quella di preservare la bellezza, no? C'è la buona volontà di restaurare, c'è una legge che ha fatto il governo armeno ad esempio che impedisce di modificare le facciate delle case tutelate all'interno del centro storico detto Kumairi di Gyumri, che è buono che ci sia questa legge, però ad esempio questa legge assolutamente non cita l'interno delle case.
Questa parte fa sempre parte dell'edificio antico ed è casa mia, abbiamo appena cominciato a fare un restauro, perché siamo ancora agli inizi, però quando abbiamo tolto la carta da parati sovietica è cominciata a cadere dei pezzi di calcinacci e sono usciti dei decori antichi della casa che adesso vi faccio vedere. Questo verde e giallo con questi cerchi è un stencil tipico del periodo Art Nouveau. Però sotto questo stencil, questo a mano di colore gialla che vedi, c'è il primo colore originale della casa. Il primo colore originale della casa perciò dovrebbe essere intorno al 1880 ed è questo colore qui. Questo è il primo colore della casa e sotto abbiamo trovato il primo decoro che ha fatto il primo proprietario, questa specie di greca che qua in Armenia la chiamano Versace perché lo usa molto Versace, però chiaramente è una greca molto antica che viene già dal periodo greco.
Nessuno spiega a queste persone come si deve restaurare e il governo deve incanalarsi all'interno anche di queste scelte. Mi rendo conto che non è semplice, che probabilmente Gyumri ha dei problemi anche maggiori, ma non c'è solamente la ripavimentazione del centro storico, delle strade, c'è anche un'idea di una linea di restauro fatta con omogenea.
Gyumri è un paesino un po' particolare, quindi adesso dopo 3 anni praticamente mi vedono tutti i giorni a girare avanti e indietro per Gyumri e dire che questo cosa ci fa qua? Chi è? C'è addirittura una poliziotta che mi saluta sempre, mi ha detto ok ciao. Dopo 3 anni dico questa è sempre qua, allora vuol dire che comunque lavora qua.
La nostra vita continua qua a Gyumri perché crediamo sia la città più ospitale dell'Armenia, perché non è una metropoli come Yerevan e crediamo che Gyumri abbia un cuore un po' più armeno, comunque una città ci può dare una dimensione anche di comodità. Ecco.
È pieno di cose belle Gyumri, ma sono diamanti ancora da tagliare, come dire, scoprire nella loro bellezza. Questo è il lavoro che aspetta tutti quanti, diciamo, persone del mondo che hanno deciso per qualche ragione di essere presenti a Gyumri in questo momento storico.
I'm joined now by Teresa Di Mauro from Prague. Teresa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Emilio.
So, Teresa, can you tell us a bit about yourself first, where you're from, and about your time in the Caucasus, specifically in Armenia?
Sure. So I'm Italian, specifically for a very little town in the Tuscan countryside. And I came to Armenia the first time in 2018 as an Erasmus student. Actually, I was just very, very curious about Armenia. When I was scrolling the choices of Erasmus for the Erasmus program, I saw Armenia and I realized that I didn't know much about it. And so I just got interested, and I chose that Armenia should be the destination of my Erasmus, so I could find out more about what is Armenia nowadays. And actually, my choice was a good choice because I came when the Velvet Revolution happened. Mm-hmm. And as a political science student, I was very interested in the developments of the revolution. My friends were joining, my peers were joining. So it was during that time that I realized, okay, maybe instead of political science, I should go for journalism because I really would like to tell what's happening here and follow this country in the long term. So from that moment on, I kept following Armenia, and then I came back again in 2019 as an intern in CivilNet, and again in 2021 as again an intern in CivilNet. So basically I used all my internship both in my bachelor degree and in my master's program to come to Armenia.
And you also have some Sicilian roots as well, no? Don't forget to mention that.
Yes.
So what brought you to Armenia? Because you spent time in Georgia as well.
Yes, that's right. In 2020, between 2019 and 2020, I was in Tbilisi working with OC Media because actually I decided after being here for, let's say, 8 months, more or less, I decided that I wanted to discover more Caucasus region in general. So after Armenia, I went to Georgia, I spent some time there, but then the pandemic happened, so I had to go back to Italy. But I decided to come back to Armenia because it was the country that I knew the most from the beginning, and it's the country where actually I think I want to build on my expertise. So this is why I keep coming back.
And your report, were you surprised to find so many Italians in Gyumri? And what was it like making this report with CivilNet, with Hagop?
Yeah, actually, I was very surprised. I didn't know that so many Italians were living there, first of all. And especially, I didn't know that they were so devoted to the well-being of the city. I had so much fun doing the report. I discovered a lot more about Gyumri, and especially I was able to see it from their point of view of Italians that chose to live in this historical city of Armenia. And actually, it was also interesting because the first time I was there in 2018, I felt a general sadness in the city. I thought it was because perhaps the consequences of the earthquake more than 30 years ago were still very vivid. But while talking to them while doing the report, I realized that Gyumri has indeed a lot of potential. So yeah, it was very, very nice, and I'm very happy that they are there now. For sure, I'm planning to go visit them again, and yeah, I think that's it.
And what did you think of CivilNet? One thing I noticed about you, Teresa, is that you're one of those journalists where ethics is important. And lastly, do you have any plans to come back to Armenia?
Well, I love CivilNet. That's why I kept coming back also to CivilNet. As I said before, I used both my internship opportunity in my bachelor degree and in my master's program to come back to Armenia, and especially to CivilNet. I found in CivilNet a very professional environment, but also very welcoming. And as a journalist who is learning, let's say, I'm at the beginning of my career, let's say, and being in CivilNet was a very great opportunity for me to learn in a safe and friendly environment. And yes, sorry, I forgot to answer to your last question. Of course, I have plans to come back to Armenia. I'm not sure if I'll be able this year, but perhaps when I finish my master's program next year, I will probably come to live in Armenia. So yeah, we'll see each other again.
Well, that's a CivilNet exclusive. You heard it here first. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you.
And the TUMO Center for Technologies, Creative Technologies itself is marking 10 years of operations, much like CivilNet. TUMO is a free education center for teenagers specializing in technology and design. There are currently 4 main centers in Armenia, in Yerevan, Gyumri, Dilijan, and Stepanakert. But more are planned for every regional capital, along with TUMO boxes, which are smaller centers that fall under the umbrella of their nearest hub. In the latest edition of CivilNet's Mindful Leaders series, CivilNet's Lara Cholakian spoke to Mary Lou Papazian, the CEO of TUMO. She gives her take as one of the Armenian women leading the charge to create tech hubs across the country.
Hello, Marilu.
Hi.
So thankful that you are joining me on this conversation of mindful leaders and for welcoming us to TUMO Center in Yerevan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You are an engineer and an education specialist, and you have been the executive director of TUMO since its inception. And a few days ago, you've actually marked TUMO's 10-year anniversary by inaugurating the building in Gyumri and by making an important announcement of a $50 million initiative to expand TUMO over the coming few years. Today, we are also marking Armenia's 30th anniversary of independence. And here's a nation that's been hit hard primarily from the Artsakh war in 2020, less than a year ago. Many Armenians are experiencing and still continue to experience physical and emotional trauma. And many people that I know have expressed that they've lost hope for the future. Yet you, with TUMO, continue to create, to build, to invest. What are your motivations and your sources of energy? And what is your vision for the future?
As you know, I was raised in Lebanon and I have seen war. And I have learned from the Lebanese people to be very resilient, to always think about the future, because whatever is happening is hopefully temporary, and not to give up hopes. And it's very important to think ahead. You should not lose time. And when you think ahead and when you think about the future that you want, and you do things while you're going through the pain, I have learned that it eases your pain and it makes it more tolerable, and it gives you a new meaning in life. We have, all of us have lost a lot of things in our lives. And I think just sitting and crying will not change anything. I believe that if you do something strong, well, something positive, and you have a positive outlook to the future, you feel that pain has less weight on you than it used to be. So that's my secret, I guess. And believe it or not, I feel that we have made mistakes, probably, we were not ready, but it's never too late to now do what we're supposed to do, and very fast.
In our own ways.
Yes.
Collective trauma, now that you talk about the war in Lebanon as well, and what happened here in Armenia and in Artsakh, collective trauma is a very wise wound. When a large group of people undergoes or experiences a traumatic event like war, like genocide, the survivors and the descendants undergo an overwhelming hyper-stress reaction. So as humans, we learn that to survive, we have to numb our pain, we have to disconnect with our feelings, and maybe we don't have the safe space to digest the pains, but this actually psychologically hardens the wounds. You interact on a daily basis with children and with youth. And for many years, you've had a very serious interest in education, even during your years in Barcelona, in Los Angeles, and also in Armenia. So my question is, what are your thoughts about incorporating the understanding of trauma in the school systems, in the education systems? And how could we help youth to better understand their pain so they can perhaps better understand and express their full potential?
Maybe we should do it indirectly, not directly. For example, if you organize projects, let's say 3D scanning of your churches and monuments in Artsakh or Armenia, or even in endangered locations, or even going to, I don't know, the cemetery in Egypt and scanning all everything. Through that kind of projects, indirectly, you're talking about the pain, and kids will start asking questions. They will not just scan things. They will discover themselves. So my way of doing these things is helping them, holding their hand, and involving them in projects where naturally they will ask the questions and they will find out, they will think, and you guide them through that experience. And as I said, indirectly, you will be able to talk about those things and not putting them and saying, okay, we have had this war, let's talk about it. If you do it indirectly, I think it will be a much better strategy, because directly some people are not ready for that. So you have to take little steps, and once they're in, you can start talking about it. And of course, you can be careful about who can or who cannot. And collectively, you can do that. In a project, it's not one person, it's a lot of people, and you can approach those things in a better way. So I believe in those things, and I have done it in my life, indirectly getting involved. And once you are in, you realize that there is much more into that. It's not just history, it's not just being responsible, it's what you have to do for the future now that you're in that position. Let's say you're in a position of scanning these monuments, and then what? What do you do with them? And how responsible are you? What are you supposed to do? Not only protecting those monuments, but continuing the culture, the Armenian culture. What does it mean? Why were we in all these countries in the diaspora? Why these diasporas disappeared? Who is in charge of all this? Why did we end up in those places? And of course, not everyone will do the same thing, but some will do in some areas and other will do other areas. And I believe that involving them in those kind of projects is what you're saying, talking about those things.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. You talk about history, and I think about your family history. Your grandfather, your mother's father, Diran Kalfayan, from Izmir, was 11 years old when his two brothers were taken away by the Turks, his two older brothers. And his father was also, I'm assuming, missing, presumably killed. So his mother and he...
No, his father and his mother went to Athens and then Egypt.
So basically, the two older brothers are taken away.
Yes.
So he, Diran, with his family, through Athens, get to Alexandria in Egypt. And soon after, I believe his mother passes away from the sorrow of having lost her sons. So from a very young age, Diran has to live to survive.
Yes.
And he starts working with his future father-in-law's company or industry or however it is. And so he works there, he meets his future wife, Azad, who's your grandmother.
Yes.
Azad's family actually also came to Alexandria, but from Gallipoli. They fled Gallipoli and reached they made their way to Alexandria. So Azad and Diran get married, they raise their kids. Malvina is your mother, is one of the daughters. So I'm telling this story because obviously these are part of your roots.
Yes.
And you recall your grandparents, I'm talking about Diran and Azad at this point, who never really necessarily spoke about the survival or the tough times, even though Azad came from a well-off family in Gallipoli, never really painted that everything was horrible. They gave you the sense that there's a future and there's an expansion of a development, and they really supported you, especially your grandmother, in doing what you want to do in life.
Yeah.
I won't go too much into the details of your father Paul's parents, but Artin or Harutyun, who was from Urfa, and your grandmother Luisa, who's from Istanbul. Again, very little story about how they made it out or how their families fled, but you have this history. Tell me, what sense have you made knowing what you know so far? What sense have you made about your own family history? How do you think it has shaped you in being who you are today, and your behaviors, your decisions, and even your life journeys?
I think from my mother's side, my grandfather and my grandmother gave me the best examples of hardworking, being sincere, caring for others, the positive aspects of life, family, and they have been my role models. On the other side, I always believe that the fact that my grandfather, the Urfati, was very rough with me also helped me shape my character. And I am grateful for that, because he was the one who always thought that women do not have any place in society, that they are only mothers, that should not even dare to do something. And I'm grateful to him that he helped me shape my strong character. Because with only Azad and Diran, I think I would have been the very sweet and hardworking person, while from Artin's side, I learned to be tough and fight back. And I always have fond memories of him and thanking him that he did that to me, and I was able to get that sense of fighting back in a good way. I think that deep down, he was my grandfather and he liked me. And that, of course, the Urfa culture and all those stigmas and everything that he was raised in made him that person. But deep down, he was a sweet human being. And from Luisa's part, because she had a very tough history of marrying someone who she did not want.
Who was conservative.
Yes, conservative. Her sisters were able to go to Marseille and become dentists and doctors, and she never got that chance. And she, until the end, she wanted to have that freedom. She also shaped me, because she was the one who was not giving up until the end. And having these two grandparents, both sides, was ideal for me. On one side is the hardworking, loving, sweet, caring, and the other side not accepting the faith that they had until the end. I think they helped me shape my character a lot, and I'm grateful to all of them.
You know, knowing the extensive experience that you've had in management and leadership, while you're talking, I'm thinking about your journey. You started off even as a construction management, team member of this important company in New York, with huge projects like the Marriott building in New York. And I mean, culturally, it's always been stigmatized that construction and engineering were all male, all male professions. Yet you perseverantly, with determination, and maybe a bit more having a lot of daring values in you, you were able to really penetrate this area that's generally known or considered, at least at that time, to be mostly a male-dominated profession. So with all of that in mind, you were mentioning your hardworkingness. You also have held these leadership positions. Tell me a little bit about the lessons you've learned of being a leader, and what principles do you follow?
I always tell my staff that, it's not like you become a leader or everybody prepares everything for you. You have to go through a path, and you have to build your character, and there are a lot of opportunities for every one of us, all of us, in life. It's a matter of you realizing, considering, and even not planning, but just jumping and taking those opportunities. I always realize that I do things, and when I get to do them, I question myself. Sometimes I'm afraid, sometimes I question if this was the right decision to do something like that. But I learned that without going through these experiences, you don't shape your character and you don't become stronger and stronger. And so knowing that there are a lot of risks, you just have to do them and take them. And with Pegor and myself, we did the same thing with our kids, always pushing them, even knowing that we're taking a big risk, not to be so protective, because otherwise they will, one day, if something happens, they will not be able to protect themselves, and we will not be there. So by putting them in situations where they have to learn to protect themselves, and having us as a support system is the best thing. And if I can, I don't know, resume what I have done, is always do things even if you're afraid. And that's my philosophy at TUMO. It's creating projects where you push everyone to their full potential and try and not to be afraid, even if they're afraid. We know, I'm afraid too. We're all afraid of the unknown, but that should not stop us.
I think when I'm actually very proud to say that I think a couple of years ago you were honored with the title of Chevalier Knight, the Order of Palme Académique bestowed by the French Republic. And that's an order and a title that's given to distinguished academics, cultural figures for their contribution in science and education. So for me, seeing you receive this also gave me a major sense of pride. And knowing your story of being the only girl in your family of 4 brothers, surrounded by male cousins, having been raised in a culture that is, generally not openly encouraging women to reach their full potential. If Sanahin were here today, your daughter, or if there are young women here, what advice would you give them, apart from working hard and not being afraid?
To dream. Dreaming is very important. To have, and to dream always bigger and bigger. Once you achieve something, never be satisfied. To continue to make that dream bigger. Because by dreaming, you open your horizon and you allow even other people to join you. And this, Pegor and I dreamt about this. We wanted this, but we never imagined that we can make it this big. And now that it is bigger, it's again continuing to dream what you can do with all this to make things even better and to have a bigger impact. Sometimes I think about the medal. People tell me why you don't wear the medal. I don't want to wear the medal. I want to be up to the level of the medal, always with what I'm doing, and to be able to say that I was getting close to that level, not even that level. So dreaming is very important. Dreaming gives you a lot of energy, hope, positive vision, and I think dreaming brings you people. With this initiative of expanding TUMO, people would not believe us, but we didn't go and search for the people who are supporting us. They came to us. Was that wrong? I don't know.
Was that luck?
Was that luck? I don't know. I don't think it's luck. You open your path. You allow other people to join you, and that's probably leadership. Your dream becomes their dream, and it's that gives strength to everything and hope.
So, what does it mean for you to be an Armenian, and what does Armenia represent for you?
A lot. I don't know why. I think, of course, my background and everything helped, but I think every person on this planet needs to have an identity, and identity is very important. Who you are, why you are here, what you're doing, and you cannot choose your identity. It's not like, okay, now I'm in Barcelona, I can become Spanish or Catalan. I cannot, even if I want. Deep down, there is a DNA, there is something that you're attached to it and that has been there in the background, and by embracing that identity, you feel more comfortable. You know, a lot of people, even when I get it in a taxi, why are you here? You can go, you can leave this country. I believe the US or Barcelona was much nicer. It is nicer. One day, my housekeeper asked me, you have traveled so much. Is it real that Armenia is very nice? How can you compare it? And I told her, no, it's not nice. We of course, draw this very nice picture of Armenia, and I have seen much nicer places, much nicer places. But this is mine. It's like your baby. It's your baby, and your baby is the nicest person on earth. Even if you know that
it has its flaws or has its issues, and it's your child.
It's your child, and Armenia is my child. Being Armenian is what I am, and I love it. And I always say I'm jealous of myself.
That's a nice way to put it. I never heard that. One thing I'm going to ask you, tell me how it resonates with you. It's a quote by Maya Angelou. She says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. I come as one and I stand as 10,000. How does that resonate for you?
Very much. I always say I have 5 kids, but in reality I have 20,000 kids at Tumo. Those are my kids, and I will have 80,000. And I want each one of them to succeed like my own kids. And I will do anything, everything in my power. Never, sometimes I say there is not enough time to do things. I wish there is more time. And I will do until my last breath, I will do everything to make sure that every one of them succeed. The other day I was on these bleachers and one girl was there spending a lot of time not studying. And I was angry at her, and I got a little bit angry at myself that I didn't talk to her the way I should have talked. But I was angry that she's losing her time, spending time where she can learn more. And then I retreated and I said, that's not the way. It's not by getting angry that you will change something. It's by opening opportunities to her, showing her things that you will get her to do things more than she thinks it's enough. So we have at Tumo, all of us, we have to do everything possible and impossible to open the path to this new generation to succeed. And that's my mission.
Marilu Papazian, thank you so much for being a source of inspiration for so many of us. And I wish you and Tumo endless success. I'm looking forward to seeing the projects that you'll be implementing in the coming years. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
And as mentioned earlier, 10 years ago today, on Armenian Independence Day, CivilNet launched onto the airwaves. Since then, the team has seen street protests, wars, elections, and revolutions. The following report by CivilNet reporter Ani Paitian looks back at CivilNet's journey over the past 10 years, and we hear the voices of the journalists, editors, cameramen, and video editors as they saw events and covered events like the 2018 revolution, the 2016 war, the 2020 war, and other street protest movements.
Հայաստանի Հանրապետության Գերագույն խորհուրդը հռչակում է Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը անկախ պետություն.
Armenia marks 30 years of independence on September 21st. CivilNet marks 10. CivilNet will continue to cover protests, human interest stories, sad stories, happy stories, political turns, revolutions, wars, elections, and well, just life. All the things that matter to Armenia. Through these years, CivilNet staff has been on the ground as witnesses to events. Journalists, cameramen, and video editors give a voice to a society. They are the ones who tell people's stories and inform the public. We are those journalists, cameramen, and editors. Today, we are in front of the camera, remembering the biggest moments of the last decade. When CivilNet broadcasted for the first time, there was no live reporting on election day. No live reporting from the side of protests, almost no English language reporting, and no young people on camera. Maria was one of the journalists to join CivilNet at its inception.
Դաշտում պակասում էր շատ, կարծում եմ այն ժամանակ երիտասարդների ձայնը, նոր թարմ շունչ, նորարար լրատվություններ պակասում։ Մենք դուրս եկանք լայվով, իսկ այն ժամանակ լայվ TV-ներ գրեթե չկային, այսինքն մենք առաջիններից էինք, եթե ոչ առաջինն էինք, որ ուղիղ եթերով որ հայտարարեցինք մեր մասին, եւ դրան հաջորդեցին շատ քաղաքացիական պայքարներ, ցույցեր, ընտրություններ, ամեն ինչ, ինչը լուսաբանելը շատ կարևոր էր։
The first civilian protest live broadcast by CivilNet was the Mashtots Park movement. During the winter of 2012, just a few months after CivilNet began broadcasting, activists from the This City Belongs to Us civic initiative protested illegal or unpopular construction works, the destruction of trees and green zones in Yerevan, specifically in Mashtots Park. But behind this full-scale movement, the question of citizens' self-determination, the fight against corruption and oligarchy, the prevalence of public interests over private ones were actually raised.
Ես շատ լավ հիշում եմ օրը ապրիլի 29-ը, այնտեղ մի պահ կար, որ քաղաքացիները վրաններ էին դնում, ոստիկանները գալիս էին տանում էին վրանները եւ հերթական այդպիսի մի օրը հենց այս հատվածում վրան դրեցին քաղաքացիները եւ ոստիկանները եկան տանելու այդ վրանները, շատ ուժեղ քաշքշուկ եղավ։ Շատ լավ հիշում եմ, որ ինչ որ պահի ոստիկանությունը հետ քաշվեց։ Մենք բոլոր լրագրողներս եւ մեդիայի ներկայացուցիչներս գնացինք գրասենյակներ տեսանյութերը տեղադրելու, հասանք գրասենյակ թե չէ, այստեղից մեզ զանգ տվեցին, ասին ոստիկանները բռնի ուժով բոլորին ծեծին ենթարկեցին եւ բերման ենթարկեցին։ Այսինքն այստեղ մենք էլի նկատում ենք, որ մեդիայի ներկայությունը որքանով էր ազդում ոստիկանների վրա, որքանի դեռ այստեղ էինք այո բռնություն գործադրում էին, բայց ոչ այդքան անհամաչափ կերպով, հենց բոլոր լրագրողները գնացին, իրենք իսկապես անհամաչափ ուժի կիրառմամբ մեծ մասին տարել էին բերման էին ենթարկել ոստիկանություն, մենք եկանք մեծ խմբված բազմությունից գրեթե մարդ չէր մնացել։
On the ground, CivilNet was covering the protests several times a day.
Այն շրջանում, երբ որ աշխարհում նոր էին բացահայտում այդ գործիքները, մենք էլ այստեղ նստած էինք բացահայտում, ստեղծում ուրեմն իրադարձային ուղիղ եթերների մշակույթը եւ ես չափազանցրած չեմ լինի, որ ասեմ, որ CivilNet-ը ուրեմն առաջնորդն է Հայաստանում առցանց մեդիաների շրջանում որպես իրադարձային ուղիղ եթերներ մատուցող մեդիա եւ դա արձանագրվեց հենց Մաշտոցի պուրակի շարժման ավարտին.
The Mashtots Park movement's success triggered new protests against decisions impacting citizens' lives. In 2013, protesters were out again to show their disagreement with fare increases from 100 to 150 drams for public transportation by bus or minibus. The movement's name, I Will Only Pay 100 Dram, was revealed with an announcement at Mashtots Park as a symbolic site of civic protest. In the end, citizens won this fight. In 2015, the world marked the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide committed by the Ottoman Empire. To mark this event and the resurrection of Armenians and Armenia, the famous Armenian-American band System of a Down held a unique concert in Yerevan's Republic Square. One day earlier, a very special guest paid a visit to CivilNet.
No nation wants to be victimized forever or remembered as victims forever. It's not necessarily a positive thing, but we need to disperse our culture, share the beautiful things about what Armenia's meant historically, pre-Christianity.
In the summer of 2015, Armenians went back to the streets. This time, they occupied Bahramian Avenue, where the parliament is. The mass protests were against a 17% hike in electricity rates. This was the third electricity rate increase in many years. The demonstrations lasted 2 weeks and were coined Electric Yerevan. CivilNet was present 24 hours every day.
Քաղաքացիները Բաղրամյան պողոտայում աղբարկղներով բարիկադներ էին շարել, դրանք շատ ինձ թվում է, երբ որ ասում ես Էլեկտրիկ Երևան այդ կադրը միանգամից աչքիդ առաջ է գալիս, հա սանիտեկի աղբարկղները ու մենք կանգնում ենք այդ աղբարկղների վրա այնտեղից ուղիղ եթեր ենք ապահովում, ամբողջ Բաղրամյան պողոտան տեսանելի էր մեզ համար։ Չգիտեմ, կար ընդհանուր, այսպես ասած, համախմբվածություն ու մեզ քաղաքացիները նաև մեզ էին վստահում, այսինքն CivilNet-ին էին վստահում, գիտեն, որ մենք անկողմնակալ ու անաչառ ներկայացնում ենք նրանց ձայնը, այսինքն հասանելի ենք դարձնում ամբողջ աշխարհին.
In 2015, under Serge Sargsyan's government, television outlets ignored and were not covering the citizens' protests.
Գիտեք, այդ տարիներին ընդհանրապես հեռուստաընկերությունները ցույցերը չէին լուսաբանում ու միակ ձայնը, այսպես ասած, միակ պատուհանը այդ ցույցերի դեպի արտաքին աշխարհ, դեպի լայն հանրությանը դա հենց ինտերնետային հեռուստաընկերություններն էին ու այդ տարիներին երևի 2-3 հեռուստաընկերություն կար ինտերնետային, որ հնարավորություններ ուղիղ եթեր ապահովելու։ Դրանց մեկը CivilNet-ն էր ու CivilNet-ը որոշեց, մենք այստեղ որոշեցինք, որ 24 ժամյա աշխատանք են կատարելու տեղում շուրջօրյա ուղիղ եթեր ենք ունենալու։
2016 saw war erupt along the line of contact in Artsakh on April 1st with the Artsakh Defense Army, backed by Armenia on one side and Azerbaijan on the other. The conflict is now known as the 4-Day War or the April War. According to official statements, 91 Armenian and 31 Azerbaijani soldiers were killed during the clashes. The CivilNet team was there to document and show the reality of the war to the world.
Հրանոթի փողերը շարունակում են նայել դեպի Ադրբեջան։
Ամենատարբեր տեղերը նկարեցինք քառօրյա պատերազմի ժամանակ դպրոցական երեխայի թաղում ենք նկարել, ժամկետային զինծառայողի թաղում ենք նկարել, նկարել ենք Սիսյանից ժամանած կամավորների Ստեփանակերտի հրապարակում, կարծեմ դա առաջի օրն էր, այդ էմոցիաները մեկ-մեկ քեզ խեղդում, հա, որտեվ չես կարող այդ դիստանցիան պահես, այդ ավելի շատ հենց, չգիտեմ, թաղումների մահացած մարդկանց, նամանդ քեզանից տարիքով ավելի փոքր, աշխատանքի ընթացքում, երբ որ դու շատ կենտրոնացած ես, մի քիչ չես մտածում, այդ օբյեկտիվով ես այդ ամեն ինչը տեսնում, բայց հետո այդ նստվածքը մնում է քո մեջ։
Following the war, things did not calm down in Armenia. During the summer of 2016, a group of armed men, calling themselves the Daredevils of Sasun, Sasnatserer in Armenian, stormed a police station on Khorenatsi Street in Yerevan. They demanded the release of opposition figure Girar Sefilian and the resignation of President Serge Sargsyan. The group began a standoff with government forces, with growing crowds of protesters joining the calls for the resignation of the president. 3 policemen were killed during the standoff and dozens were wounded.
Ինձ թվում է Սասնաձեռերի դեպքերը թե իմ կարիերայի համար, թե մեր պետության համար շատ ցենց անկյունակարային որոշեցի այդ դեպքերից հետո որոշ ժամանակ անցավ ու դուրս եկա լրատվականից, որովհետև շատ ցենց տեսնում ես թե ինչպես են ոստիկանները մարդ ծեծում, այդ իրադարձությունների կենտրոնում ես միշտ, այդ լարված այդ էներգիան, որ կուտակված է, դու միշտ էպի կենտրոնում ես, թեպետ այդ նաև կարող է քոնը չլինի գաղափարապես, կարող է դու դրա հետ համաձայն չլինես, բայց դու որպես մասնագետ ստիպված ես այնտեղ լինել ու քո պարտքը կատարել, լուսաբանել իրադարձությունը, բայց նաև այդ կարող է դու էլ ստանաս հարված էլի ու այդ ամեն ինչը նաև պետք է ուղիղ հեռարձակես կամ պետք է հետևես նաև որպեսզի կադրդ պատշաճ հասնի սպառողին.
This footage taken by David became famous among the media and the public. At that very moment, police used tear gas to disperse demonstrators.
Ոնց որ ավելի շատ բացասականով եմ հիշում տարածքը, որովհետև ստեղ ոստիկանները այսինքն մարդը մարդու էր ծեծում ու առանձնակի դաժանությամբ դժվար թե ինչ-որ դրական էմոցիա արտնանա էլի երևի այդ կադրն է, որ ես ստացվեց հաջողված կադր է, որը նման լավ կադր դեռ կյանքում չեմ արել, այդ է միակ դրական բանը, որ հիշում եմ, մնացածը տենց տխուր է.
From the start, CivilNet chose to focus on environmental issues and created a special segment called Green News. The reports highlighted urgent environmental crises as well as positive eco-initiatives. A topic that continues to be urgent, one that is both environmental and political, is the matter of mine exploitation in various places of Armenia. The most notable controversial sites are Terut and Amusar.
Որպես այդպիսին խորքային աշխատել եմ այդ ընթացքում Թեղուտի եւ Ամուսարի թեմաներով երկու հանքերի միայն կարող էինք հանքը հեռվից մի քանի կիլոմետր հեռվից ուղղակի տեսնել ու կադրեր անել զուտ հանքը ու չխոսել ոչ մեկի հետ ստանալ մեր հարցերի պատասխանները մեր այսպես ասած աղբյուրները հանդիսանում էին տեղի մարդիկ, հա, տեղի ժողովուրդը, ովքեր որ ապրում էին ու գյուղի մեծ մասը իր աշխատանքը կատարում էր հենց այդ հանքում ու Այն ինչ որ ես հիշում եմ, հա, ամենացավոտը այն էր, որ կոնկրետ Թեղուտում բնակվող մարդիկ կորցրել էին ամեն ինչ։ Վերջին իմ ֆիլմը վավերագրական նրա մասին էր, հենց որ մարդիկ կորցրել են ամեն ինչ։
The work of a journalist is reporting, and the filming of a camera does not make a good video report in itself. The final touch to the package depends on the video editor and their ability to be creative even during emergency situations.
Մենք ուսումնասիրում ենք կադրերը լրագրողի հետ, ընտրում ենք լավագույնը եւ մատուցում ենք։ Ամեն պահ կարող է ինչ որ իրադարձություն փոխվի եւ այդ լուրը արդեն հինանա եւ այդ մոնտաժի մեջ շատ արագություն, ճկունություն եւ ճիշտ կողմնորոշվելը կարծում եմ առաջնային բաներ են, որը պետք է ունենան։
Then there was April 2018, a significant political turning point in Armenia's political history. Following the installation of President Serge Sargsyan as Prime Minister, despite his insistence that the parliamentary reforms were not intended to lead to such an event, a new movement, led by opposition member of parliament Nikol Pashinyan, started to roar. Pashinyan walked from Gyumri to Yerevan, calling on citizens to join him against Sargsyan and the continuing abuses of power. This was the premise and led to the famous Velvet Revolution. CivilNet staff worked 24 hours days with live broadcasts of what was happening in the streets. The mass protests led to the resignation of Serge Sargsyan and to a regime change. Armenia entered a period now referred to as the post-Velvet Revolution stage, with Nikol Pashinyan elected prime minister after snap parliamentary elections.
Հեղափոխության ընթացքում սկսվեց լրիվ ուրիշ իրավիճակ։ Մենք անցանք այն ոնց որ մեր մեջ միացավ այն կոճակը, որը մեզ արտակարգ ռեժիմով աշխատանքի էր անցում կատարում, մենք քնում էինք մեքենաներում, քնում էինք օֆիսում, մենք նորմալ չենք սնվում։
As with the Electric Yerevan movement of 2015, citizens stood in solidarity with each other for almost a month.
Եվ այդ օր այդ ամենի համախումբն էր։ Այդ օրերին մենք եւ թերևս դա էր, որ ինձ ավելի հավելյալ ուժ էր տալիս, որ ես առանց տրտնջալու, բողոքելու աշխատեմ անկախ ժամային պայմաններից ու անկախ այն հանգամանքից, որ իմ կինը հղի էր եւ պետք էր լինել իր կողքը, քան փողոցում։
Then another sort of twist took place, striking the whole world, Armenia included. The COVID-19 pandemic, the number of infected people and death rate was increasing as the country entered the lockdown for 2 months. Journalists worked from home, producing mainly articles. The Zoom call platform became the most important tool for journalists in order to provide video content from home. Then on September 27th, Azerbaijan attacked Stepanakert, the capital of the Republic of Artsakh. A large-scale war erupted that lasted 44 days, resulted in 4,000 dead, including soldiers and civilians.
Էմոցիոնալ առումով իմ համար շատ դժվար է եղել պատերազմը լուսաբանելը։ Եղել է հակառակը, որ չես կարացել անես գործը։ Օրինակ մի դեպք կհիշեմ, երբ որ ես ու իմ մի քանի ընկերներ Ստեփանակերտի եղբայրական գերեզմանատանն էինք ու հուղարկավորությունները լինում էր շատ քիչ մարդկանցով, որ հանկարծ կրակի տակ չմնան։ Ու ես հիշում եմ, որ լուսանկարչական ապարատով էի ու մի մեքենա կանգնեցավ, Opel էր, մագնիշը կդժվարանամ ասեմ, ու մեջից դուրս եկան 3 մարդ։ Այդ ժամանակ ես բան արեցի, ուղղակի ոնց որ մի հատ լուսանկարեցի այդ բանը, կադրը, հետո տեսա, որ այդ մարդիկ դժվարանում են, էլի, դագաղը բերեն 3 հոգով։ Ես ուղղակի լուսանկարչական ապարատը գցեցի թիկունքիս ու գնացի այդ մարդկանց օգնեցի։ Դժվար է, որ հայես ու քո երկրի պատերազմն ես լուսաբանում։ Ու չգիտեմ, այդ սահմանը չգիտեմ, հիմա իմ արածը պրոֆեսիոնալ է, ես պիտի իմ գործը անեի, թե պիտի օգնեի այդ մարդկանց, բայց այդ պահին ես ճիշտը տենց եմ գտել ու ես գնացի մի կողմից, ես բռնեցի, բերեցի ու մի խոսքով հուղարկավորեցինք այդ տղային, շատ երիտասարդ տղային։ Հեսա բանանը փորձեմ մի քանի վիդեո ցույց տալ։ Այս օրերին բանը արդեն քիմիական զենքեր էին էլի օգտագործում, հենց այդ օրերին։ Ես անտառներով
Այս կադրերը որ նայից նայում ես ոնց ես քեզ
Դե ավելի ոնց որ զգացողությունները բթացած է, բայց ինչ որ անհասկանալի տհաճություն կա։
Grief and anger followed the conclusion of the war. Protests took place, one side demanding Pashinyan's resignation, the other side defending him. Armenians have never been as divided as the war left them. In June 2021, Nikol Pashinyan won another snap parliamentary election, against opponents that included a former president and many former officials. Pashinyan's victory did not do much to resolve the deep divisions. Instead, it raised the questions about Armenians and their priorities. Security, democracy, predictability, stability, these questions remain.
Այսօր մենք ապրում ենք մի իրականությունում, երբ կա կյանք պատերազմից առաջ եւ պատերազմից հետո։ Ինչ ցույց տվեց պատերազմը? Պատերազմը ինձ թվում է լակմուսի թղթի նման բացահայտեց, վերհանեց այն բոլոր թերությունները, որ պետությունը ուներ, բոլոր ոլորտներում։ Եվ այսօր հատկապես 2020-ի աղետալի պատերազմից հետո մենք որպես մեդիա եւ մենք որպես CivilNet ոչ միայն չպիտի մեր թևաթափ լինենք կամ մտածենք, որ ինչ-որ բան արված է արդեն, այլ երակի, քարակի, տասնապատիկ անգամ ավելի ջանք պիտի գործադրենք կայացնելու այն պետությունը, որը պիտի կայացնենք։
Մագերեսային լալու բանն է, որ սպառնալիքն է, որ պիտի մակրավենք, շատ արագ, շատ կարճ լրատվություն մի դնես, որ շատ բան չսեր, եւ այդպիսով կարծես գիսատ կմնա դեղեցությունները եւ հանրությունը կզրկվի իսկական լուրը իր ամբողջ տարողությամբ ստանալու գայելիութենեն։ Ամեն անգամ որ մեր երկիրը, մեր ժողովուրդը դիմակրաված է ծանր բահ, CivilNet-ը կերազանցած է ինքսին։
Այսօր մենք հասկանում ենք, որ ունենք խնդիրներ յուրաքանչյուր ոլորտում, առողջապահություն, կրթություն, անվտանգություն։ CivilNet-ը ըստ իս հենց այն հայելինը, որը ցույց է տալիս այսպես Պարզ ցույց է տալիս այն թերությունները, որոնք կան։ Ստիպում է նաև իշխանությանը գնալ այն բոլոր ռեֆորմների, բարեփոխումների ճանապարհով, որոնք տարիներ շարունակ խոստացվել են, որոնք դրվել են կառավարության ծրագրի հիմքում, որոնց մասին խոսվել է 2018-ին, բայց այսօր դրանք չեն կատարվում։ Այսօր ավելի քան երբևէ CivilNet-ը պետք է լինի հենց ճակատում, հենց առաջնագծում պարտադրելու եւ ստիպելու կառավարությանը բերելու այն փոփոխությունները, որոնց համար մենք պայքարել ենք տարիներով։
The challenges to come are immense, and the future seems to be very uncertain. No matter what happens, however, there is one thing for sure. Media, in particular CivilNet, will continue to report from the front line of events and endeavor to inform the public.
And finally, on a lighter note, CivilNet has relaunched its musical Unplugged series, where different Armenian artists can showcase their skills on the decks. In our latest episode, Lucia Kagramanyan plays a set on CivilNet's balcony. Playing only vinyls, Lucia showcases her archive of Armenian hits, including jazz, pop, and disco. We'll leave you with her collection, which shines a light on some of the Armenian gems of music. Thank you for joining us on this Independence Day. Happy birthday, Armenia, and happy birthday, CivilNet.
բաչերով աղջիկ Ողջ աշխարհման եկա Քեզպես աղջիկ չտեսա Ես մինու շարմոր տղա Իմ սարդի հետ մի խաղա Արի բացեր տան դուրը Ասա բարով ես եկել Օրը կանաչ կարմիրե Boyatalar bardiye La 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 Yes vonca sirem Karnan arevesim yar Yes sirakar batani Yes terellem matani Ari batserdan dur Assa baroves yegel La 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 la
Փայլում ես ու նազում, ինձ հայրում ես ունքերի խաղով, ասաում ես երազում, ում ես կանչում ծիծաղով, երբ նայում ես հմայում ես կոլույսով, լուսաբաց ես կարնա լուսաբաց, ես ապրում եմ քո կարոտով քո հույսով, քո աչքերով եմ գերված, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, Magis es arevor Galis es dու ինձ մոտ Իմ կյանքի ահարավոր Galis es դու ինձ մոտ Magis es arevor Galis es շատացնում ես նազերը, քո աչքերում արևն է շովում, դու նայում ես ու շոյում ես մազերը, աղբյուրի պես ծիծաղում։ Ես չգիտեմ թե որտեղից դու եկար, կանաչ կառնոցից նակի պես, դու չկայր իմ սրտի մեջ սերը չկար, հիմա սիրո ծով եմ ես։ Գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, մահիս ես արևոտ, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, իմ կյանքի ահարավոտ, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, մահիս ես արևոտ, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, իմ կյանքի ահարավոտ, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, մահիս ես արևոտ, գալիս ես դու ինձ մոտ, իմ կյանքի ահարավոտ, իմ կյանքի ահարավոտ, իմ կյանքի ահարավոտ։ Դու ծաղիկ ես, ույրով ես հարուստ, դու արև ես, լույսով ես հարուստ, իմ սրտի մեջ հուրն է առաջին սիրո, իմ երազն են երազները քո, իմ սրտի մեջ հուրն է առաջին սիրո, իմ երազն են երազները քո։ La 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 la, անցնում են օրեր և հեռանում, մեր սերը երբեք չի ձերանում, դու և մոտ ես և անչափ հեռու, արագ գոհարներ ու լույսեր, ամեն արցունք սեր է այն սեր, անցնում են օրեր և հեռանում, մեր սերը երբեք չի ձերանում, մեր սերը երբեք չի ձերանում, մեր սերը երբեք չի ձերանում։ Maku